Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. Senator John Fetterman has announced some strong words for neoliberal corporate vulture James Carville. And in return, I have some words for John Fetterman. Obviously, Fetterman, who ran embracing himself as a progressive, has recently backtracked on that. Shocker. But now Fetterman is talking to Politico, showering praise on the sinking Titanic that is Joe Biden, while telling James Carville to go take a hike. Let's show you this, which I found interesting. Politico said, we've talked about this a few months ago, and you told me then you thought Biden would win Pennsylvania and win the overall election, but things have gotten worse for him since then. Trump is now ahead in many polls. But that doesn't really matter, Fetterman said. There's a whole lifetime in politics between now and next November as well. I'm not worried about that. And I'm very vocal about this, too, while there are Democrats that are being very critical about the president. I'll use this as another opportunity to tell James Carville to shut the fuck up. Like I said, my man hasn't been relevant since grunge was a thing. And I don't know why he believes it's helpful to say these kinds of things about an incredibly difficult circumstance with an incredibly strong and decent and excellent president. I'll never understand that. Oh boy, we gotta break that down. On one hand, I'm never gonna attack somebody for telling James Carville to shut the fuck up. So kudos for that. We agree on that. But I don't quite understand this, full throttle embrace of Biden. He says, I don't know why he believes it's helpful during an incredibly difficult circumstance with an incredibly strong and decent and excellent president. Well, what is the incredibly difficult circumstance? Is Biden suffering from something we don't know about that he could have done more on? Is he talking about inflation being the incredibly difficult circumstance that President Biden's response to was to send harshly toned letters to the fossil fuel executives and the corporate CEOs, kindly asking them to lower prices when his government actually has tools that could have forced them to lower prices, which other governments use those tools? I don't know what's the difficult circumstances that Fetterman is bending over backwards to, empathize and sympathize with Joe Biden. When he came in, his polls were up after he, did the COVID relief bill, after he, expanded unemployment, gave checks, rental relief. He had the highest poll numbers in early 2021 after he did that. And then he started listening to Lawrence Summers and other corporate ghouls and started peeling those things back. He set those things to expire after a year, and then he didn't fight to extend them, including the child tax credit, which was part of that popular approval rating, that high approval rating Biden had. He set it to expire after a year and then never fought President Manchin and Vice President Sinema to extend them. Never used the bully pulpit to shame Manchin or Sinema on blocking the extension of the child tax credit, among other things. Unilaterally surrendered on a $15 minimum wage, abandoned the public option pretty much as soon as he was elected, which he ran on. Seems like a lot of these difficult circumstances, Biden, who he's calling a great man and an excellent president, brought on himself. But he says, I'll never understand that. He's an incredibly strong, decent, and excellent president? Well, I don't know. I don't think it's very decent showering Israel right now with billions and billions of dollars as they slaughter, at this point, 1% to 2% of Gaza, about 8,000 to 10,000 children, over 20,000 people. I don't find that to be incredibly decent. We'll get to him on Israel a little bit later. But as the interview went on, after he said to James Carville, go fuck yourself, which I, of course, embrace, Politico said, when I talk to voters, they're worried about inflation. They really don't like the economy. Are you not hearing that? Reminder, a big part of how John Fetterman ran for senator was running on inflation. I credit him at the time because he was one of the only candidates among Democrats that was actually harshly going after corporations for price gouging, which was after the original, supply chain issues of COVID, et cetera, most of the inflation was due to greedflation among corporations, which Democrats in office and candidates didn't want to talk about because they're getting funded by those same corporate vultures that are screwing you in the grocery store and on shelves everywhere. He ran on it. So I'm pretty sure he knows that inflation was due to corporate price gouging. But here, I don't know. Sounds like he's kind of pushing that away, trying to minimize inflation. To me, Fetterman says, it's going to come down to good and evil and personalities and everything about this too. It's going to be a gut check kind of situation where it's just like, really? 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 As you're going into the voting booth, do we want chaos and somebody that is in 3 or 4 criminal hearings? Is this somebody that you want to be their finger back, to have their finger back on the button? Or do you want to have a decent and very effective president that has gotten us through the pandemic, addressed inflation, and has been a real masterclass of diplomacy with Israel? Oh, my Lord. Oh, my Lord. And again, I don't want to hear it in the comments. This is not me cheerleading for Donald Trump. I would love nothing more than for Donald Trump to go to prison. I think he should go to prison for at least 3 out of 4 of the things he's indicted on. There is a threat of Trump. So I'm not telling you, who to vote for or who not to vote for. That's up to you. Trump is a threat, which is why running a weak sauce, very weak, vulnerable, and frankly, my left toe has higher approval ratings than Joe Biden right now, is emboldening and probably going to help Trump get reelected despite all the criminal cases, despite his talk of wanting to be a dictator. Fetterman doesn't seem to understand that. He's, simping for Joe Biden and trying to make him seem like this, wonderful statesman, when in reality, nothing of the kind. But let's go through what he said again. He says, it's good versus evil. What is this, Rocky 4? Rocky versus, Drago? Good versus evil? I don't really think young voters are buying that anymore because they don't really find Biden so good. Sure, they might find Trump evil, but what they're seeing in Israel, pretty evil. Biden's the president. They were told we were going to cut drilling on public lands. Meanwhile, Biden has doubled drilling on public lands while there's a climate inferno going on. Pretty evil. Biden's answer, instead of declaring a climate emergency, was doing a press conference and announcing cooling centers. Pretty evil that you are standing aside as the planet burns and, telling, as president, setting the fire department with super soakers. I call that pretty evil. I mean, we could go on and on. I've talked about Biden is continuing Trump's policies that backdoor try to privatize Medicare, among other things. But when he says, you want to have a decent and effective president that has gotten us through the pandemic, well, I would argue that. Go talk to people in your life right now. I'd say most of them are sick. The word COVID is no longer in the news, but COVID is through the roof right now. There is basically no testing anymore. The CDC isn't even reporting data. People with long COVID is going up. So in 5 to 10 years, we might have a long-term disability issue due to COVID and the pandemic. Biden got us through. Biden got us through the pandemic by prematurely announcing it over because he was more concerned with the economy and getting back to normal and allowing Americans to basically be guinea pigs for a pandemic that has new strains over and over, many of which are getting worse. There's a new strand going around right now that basically evades immunity. People are getting sicker and sicker. There was a big New York Times piece on long COVID increasing, but he's gotten us through the pandemic. He's addressed inflation. Yeah, inflation has gone down. But if you talk to people, the grocery bills still high, rent, housing still high, interest rates still high. You got gentrification, which has been the 20-year inflation, still running strong. Gas isn't $4 on the East Coast anymore or $7 on the West Coast anymore. It's lower, but it's still costing a lot of money to put food on the table. Electric bills, housing, not to mention college and student loans, which there were things Biden could have done outside of the Supreme Court's decision to bury his student loan plan that he chose not to. This is addressing inflation. Biden could have threatened, as I said all along, he could have said to the fossil fuel companies and the grocers and Big Pharma and all the rest, hey, all you companies price gouging right now, we're going to pull your federal subsidies because every industry gets them, particularly the fossil fuel industry that gets $15 billion a year. We're pulling your $15 billion by the end of the week if you don't lower gas prices to match what the price of oil globally costs. Didn't do that, but sent them a harshly worded letter. And a real masterclass of diplomacy with Israel, John Fetterman says. Did I miss the masterclass in diplomacy? Did Biden step in and end the war before over 20,000 innocent Palestinians were slaughtered? Did Biden step in to somehow convince Hamas to release all the Israeli hostages, which we can criticize Israel while also caring about the hostages? I sure do. And I want them released as part of a ceasefire. Did Biden do something to push Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israel's Dick Cheney, out of the prime minister seat and put in somebody slightly more sane and less genocidal? Not that I could tell. Has Biden put forward a real two-state solution that's not splintering land and giving it to Palestine, but actually going back to the pre-1967 lines to give Palestine, the West Bank, Gaza, and parts of Jerusalem? What diplomacy is John Fetterman talking about? I couldn't tell you. I have no idea. I want to also show you what he said, particularly about Israel. He was asked, are you surprised that so many progressives disagree with you on Israel? I mean, of course, I expected that there will always be a diversity of opinions, and that as long as things go that the Democratic caucus might splinter more, I would be the last man standing to be absolutely there on the Israeli side on this with no conditions, So what does that mean? They could kill 100,000 Palestinians. They could kill 200,000, 500,000. No conditions. He says, I grieve and it's awful, the incredible civilian deaths and the suffering. It's awful. War is hell, as they say, but only one side has used civilians as human shields. Well, excuse me, but war typically is between two armies. Right now, one side cannot defend itself, and that's the Palestinians in Gaza. So I would take issue with the war framing. Only one side will systematically rape, torture, and mutilate Israeli women and girls in the most unspeakable, awful ways. Without destroying Hamas, there will be no enduring peace and a stable two-state solution. About this destroying Hamas, which I have gotten in arguments with people in my family who, as I've always been open about, are pretty Zionist, including my father. What do you mean by destroying Hamas? You cannot destroy an idea. You cannot destroy an ideology. You can kill a lot of their soldiers, but by the amount of innocent people you're killing, you're just regenerating and reproducing times 3 the amount of people you kill, and you're creating a much worse version of Hamas. That's exactly how ISIS was created when we went in and invaded Iraq under false bullshit pretext, and we killed and maimed 500,000 Iraqis, which created ISIS out of the rubble. We're not going to eradicate Hamas. You could kill a lot of their soldiers, you could destroy their infrastructure, and the new soldiers will then rebuild it. Even the New York Times of all, is now kind of talking about this. Headline: skepticism grows over Israel's ability to dismantle Hamas. Israel has vowed time and time to eliminate the group responsible for the brutal October 7th attack, but critics increasingly see that goal as unrealistic or even impossible. And critics both within Israel and outside have questioned whether resolving to destroy such a deeply entrenched organization was ever realistic. One former Israeli national security advisor called the plan, quote, vague. I think that we have reached a moment when the Israeli authorities will have to define more clearly what their final objective is. President Emmanuel Macron of France said this month, the total destruction of Hamas, does anyone think that's possible? If it is, that war will last 10 years. It probably will last longer than 10 years. And to be clear, it ain't possible because the only solution here is a political solution, not a military solution. Hamas is rooted in the ideology that Israeli control over what it regards as Palestinian lands must be opposed by force, a tenet likely to endure, experts said. Quote, as long as that context is there, you will be dealing with some form of Hamas, said Tahania Mustafa, senior Palestine analyst at the International Crisis Group think tank. To assume that you could simply uproot an organization like that is a fantasy. Oh, John Fetterman seems to be living in a lot of fantasies lately, including Biden being an excellent, stable, and champion of diplomacy, and that we're going to eradicate Hamas. I got to tell you the truth, behind the scenes, during the midterms of 2022, I was torn my wife was about to give birth, so I wasn't going to go. But I was torn about sending Louis DeAngelis, a reporter of Status Coup, to cover Fetterman versus Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania. On one end, I felt we're a news outlet. I want to cover at least one race, and he was the most progressive-ish candidate out there. At least he was talking about labor and unions and price gouging. But my gut kind of told me, I don't know, something smells about this guy. Something doesn't seem authentic. And I was torn. I sent him, Louis. We covered it. I don't regret it. But I think my instincts were right. The record didn't match the rhetoric on John Fetterman. Is he the worst of them among the Democrats? No, he's not. But, claps for the FU to James Carville. Cringe on everything else.